The story of child stars in Hollywood has long been a complicated one, but Sawyer Sweeten's story is unique in the way it merged total fame with surprising obscurity. The cultural backdrop of his childhood was the late 1990s and early 2000s, a pivotal era for television, where families still gathered around the TV in the living room to laugh together. Everybody Loves Raymond was part of that tradition, a slice-of-life series that revolved around the comedic friction in the Barone family, led by Ray Romano and Patricia Heaton. The show's comfort food-style humor felt like a constant companion, and while the kids playing the Barone twins were simply adorable, few fans fully realized that Sawyer and Sullivan were actually living out their formative years on that set. Their entire childhood was played out in parallel to a fictional life, and it was all captured on film. To appreciate how unusual and disorienting that can be, consider that Sawyer Sweeten started portraying Geoffrey Barone before he even knew what acting really meant. He was just 16 months old. Babies on sitcoms are mostly present for cute factor, smiling, giggling, or giving comedic fodder for adult characters. But as children grow, their own little personalities start to shine through. They learn lines, participate in comedic beats, and start picking up elements of the adult world around them. So from the time he could speak complete sentences, Sawyer was on set, hearing action and cut more often than many adult actors do in the early stages of their careers. While most kids that age were exploring daycare or preschool, Sawyer was exploring the intricacies of TV production. Everyone involved in Everybody Loves Raymond recalls an atmosphere of genuine warmth among the cast. Ray Romano was famously caring toward the children who played his on-screen kids. Patricia Heaton has also been praised for how she extended a maternal attitude toward them. It was a family-friendly environment in many ways, and the producers did their best to protect the children's well-being and not overwhelm them with long, exhausting shoot days. But the nature of the entertainment industry can still be intense for a youngster. There's a mix of excitement, applause from the studio audience, praise from grown-ups, the occasional fun of signing an autograph, and confusion, such as not knowing why strangers suddenly recognize you while you're out grocery shopping with your parents. By the time Everybody Loves Raymond wrapped its 9th and final season in 2005, Sawyer and Sullivan were 10 years old. That's older than many fans realize, because the show famously began airing in 1996, though the twins didn't appear in every single scene. For viewers who didn't track the exact timeline, it was easy to see them as littler than they were. But those close to them remember that transitional period vividly. Madylin Sweeten, Sawyer's older sister both in the show and real life, was also part of the cast, playing Allie Barone. Together, these three siblings formed a bond through shared experience that few of us can imagine. They were growing up within a manufactured family environment, while also being siblings in real life. On screen, the twins provided comedic beats that displayed the innocence of childhood. They would crack little jokes or show up in matching pajamas to poke their head into scenes, stealing the viewers' hearts. Some fans might remember a running gag where Ray would attempt to discipline Geoffrey, and Michael, played by Sullivan, in his own bumbling way, only to be undercut by the comedic wit of the kids or the stern presence of Patricia Heaton's character Deborah. You'd watch these two adorable boys and feel like you knew them personally, like you were part of their living room after dinner. It's no wonder that Everybody Loves Raymond consistently ranked high in viewership ratings and won multiple awards over its span. The show was a phenomenon at the time, bridging generational gaps with humor that resonated across different ages and backgrounds. But once the show ended, something interesting happened. That comedic routine that was so integral to Sawyer's daily life vanished almost overnight. While Ray Romano and Patricia Heaton were fully developed adults, seasoned actors in comics with future career plans, the children found themselves in an odd space. In the blink of an eye, everything that they'd known, studios, scripts, directed scenes, disappeared. There was no normal transition, no big farewell to a job they might have recognized as such. The show ended, and they were still children. Many child actors step directly into new roles, or they start auditioning for other parts. But for the Sweeten twins, there wasn't a pipeline in place. There was no immediate second project lined up for them. They were just kind of freed back into the world, except now they were older kids who had spent 9 years in a carefully controlled environment. When your entire life up to that point is tightly choreographed, the abrupt shift to normalcy can be jarring, and for some, deeply disorienting. In a relatively short period, the Sweeten family decided to leave California, moving away from the Hollywood hustle. While that might have given them a sense of relief or anonymity, it also removed them from the only professional sphere they'd known. Unlike some other child stars who chase further fame, the Sweeten children largely disappeared from the public eye. This might have been a protective move by their parents, trying to let them enjoy an ordinary adolescence, doing chores, going to regular school, and interacting with peers who didn't care about prime-time TV schedules. From a distance, it might sound like an ideal path to normalcy, but for a kid whose identity was entwined with performing, losing that framework could feel disorienting, like stepping off a stage into darkness and not knowing where you fit in the world. Sawyer Sweeten, according to relatives, was quiet, not alarmingly so, but thoughtful and a bit shy. After the show ended, he navigated the typical teenage concerns: friends, maybe a part-time job, the ups and downs of growing older. But as the years passed, subtle signs of distress began to emerge. Family members would later say that he was wrestling with a sadness no one had fully appreciated. He kept mostly to himself. It was never the kind of rebellious or outrageous behavior that tabloids love to report. There was no spiral into substance abuse or fights with the law. Instead, it was a stillness, a pulling back from social life. Every so often, he would open up in a small moment of vulnerability, but generally he kept a lid on whatever was brewing inside. This pattern isn't uncommon among those who struggle with depression, especially young men. They often hide their feelings, worried about burdening others or seeming weak. Meanwhile, friends and family might dismiss the behavior as a normal teenage phase, attributing it to something fleeting. Sawyer's family apparently understood he was down at times, but no one suspected the severity of the situation. After all, he had no major meltdown. He wasn't the subject of any sensational headlines. He didn't post dark messages on social media. He was outwardly just a reserved young man trying to find his place in life. If anything, people might have thought he was just quietly adjusting, or maybe not as enthralled with the notion of being famous like so many child actors before him. One lesser-known anecdote comes from a close friend of the family who spoke on condition of anonymity years after Sawyer's passing. She described a time when Sawyer, about 16 years old, was at a small gathering at their home. Most of the teens there were chatting about relationships, sports, future plans. But Sawyer was off to the side, quietly strumming a guitar. He didn't play particularly well. It seemed more like a comfort, a way to keep his hands busy. When someone joined him and asked how he was doing, he apparently smiled and said something like, "I'm okay. I guess I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." That sentiment, while subtle, captures the quiet confusion that may have hung over him. The friend recalled that Sawyer quickly changed the subject, joking about how everybody loves guitars, in a wry reference to the show. It was a gentle, self-deprecating sense of humor, but it hinted that the show's shadow followed him even then. It's possible that leaving acting made Sawyer feel he lacked direction. For some child actors, once the spotlight dims, the stark difference in daily life can trigger deep insecurity or a sense of loss. Imagine being recognized and praised for something so publicly, only to find that the offers dry up, that the phone stops ringing, and that you're now just a regular teenager in a regular school. Maybe some kids love that normalcy, but others might feel as though they've been put out to sea without a compass, especially if no one prepared them for a future beyond the industry. The hush around Sawyer's internal world grew deeper as he reached his late teens, culminating in that fateful day in April 2015. He was in Texas with family, not at a Hollywood party or some seedy motel. He wasn't in a place people associate with tragedies of stardom. He was at a relative's home. On April 23, 2015, Sawyer died by suicide, using a firearm belonging to that relative. No note was found, no text message or phone call that might have signaled a final goodbye. The shock was immediate and devastating. When the news broke, the entertainment community and fans of Everybody Loves Raymond were stunned. How could this happen? Where were the warning signs? Celebrities often make headlines for dramatic crises, but Sawyer Sweeten had no such public meltdown. He had been invisible to the tabloids, presumably living a quiet life. So the abruptness of his death rattled everyone who once knew him as the sweet, doe-eyed kid on TV. The grief his family experienced was immeasurable. They issued statements expressing their heartbreak. Madylin, who had been so close to Sawyer her entire life, was particularly vocal in urging people to watch for signs of depression in their loved ones. She emphasized how easy it is to miss. Romano spoke with heavy sadness about the bright boy he'd watched grow up on set. Patricia Heaton expressed heartbreak, remembering Sawyer as an amiable and lovable child. The show's cast and crew organized a private memorial to honor him, a gathering that was said to be full of tears and stunned disbelief. Some of the production staff who had watched the twins grow from babies into teenagers recounted how it doesn't feel real. The tragedy felt especially cruel because it had occurred in the absence of any typical Hollywood downfall. In the broader cultural context, stories of child actors struggling with mental health are not rare. Hollywood is filled with cautionary tales of substance abuse, exploitation, legal trouble, or destructive relationships. We've seen repeated headlines about youngsters whose fame soared quickly and ended in scandal. But Sawyer's story stands out because there was no scandal. He didn't descend into high-profile partying or public rants. He remained almost entirely under the radar. That sense of quiet, unspoken isolation might be what resonates most deeply for those who hear his story. Depression doesn't always announce itself with flashing neon signs. Sometimes it creeps in, unacknowledged, while the world is distracted by bigger, flashier problems. It's worth asking whether the entertainment industry provided any type of mental health support for Sawyer and his siblings once the show ended. There's a growing recognition that child actors need guidance during and after their time on set. Guidance that extends beyond finances and academic tutoring. They need emotional and psychological support, a roadmap for navigating life off-screen, and coping strategies for the abrupt shift in identity that occurs when a series wraps. The demands of filming, the repeated exposure to public scrutiny, and the confusion of living a dual life, one in front of the cameras, one behind, can take a real toll. For a long time, Hollywood neglected this aspect of child stardom. It's also important to consider broader societal factors regarding mental health in teenagers. In the U.S., mental health issues among adolescents often remain hidden until they escalate into crises. The stigma around talking about depression or suicidal thoughts can drive people to suppress them, especially if they worry about burdening family members or losing face among peers. Perhaps Sawyer felt he couldn't reach out, or maybe he didn't know how to articulate the heaviness he was feeling. In a society that frequently overlooks quiet pleas for help, it's all too easy for a gentle, introverted individual to slip through the cracks. One rarely mentioned detail is that Sawyer, in the months before his death, had been planning a trip to California to reconnect with old acquaintances from the show. This anecdote came from a close friend who revealed that Sawyer was somewhat nostalgic, expressing a desire to catch up with the old crowd. Was this a sign that he was trying to reconnect with a part of himself that felt familiar and safe? Or was it a farewell tour, a last glance at a life he'd lost? We'll never truly know. This question, and many others like it, linger in the aftermath of his passing. There's a profound sense of unfinished narrative. He was only 19, on the cusp of an adulthood that might have held new adventures, relationships, career paths, or even a return to acting if that spark ever rekindled. In trying to unpack how this tragedy happened, some point to the broader social failure to support child actors once they're no longer profitable. Hollywood is, after all, an industry. When a show ends, the producers, directors, and crew typically move on to other projects. There is no continuing employee assistance program for child actors to ensure they transition smoothly into adolescence and adulthood. While older actors have agents, managers, or personal resources, kids might just have their parents, who themselves might be unfamiliar with the complexities of child stardom's aftermath. With no blueprint for what comes next, a kid can feel unmoored. Sawyer's death shined a harsh light on that failing, prompting renewed calls from some corners of the industry to provide structured aftercare for child performers. Skeptics might argue that plenty of child actors turn out fine, so perhaps it's not the industry's duty to babysit them once their roles end. But mental health professionals counter that performing for years in a closely monitored environment, especially starting so young, can mold a child's sense of identity in ways that complicate normal development. It's akin to a soldier returning from a deployment overseas. There's a re-entry process that's crucial for mental well-being. Some child actors adapt well, but others might carry silent burdens. Without a supportive net, those burdens can become unbearable. Sawyer's suicide also ignited conversations around gun safety, though briefly, as the family requested privacy. The fact that he was able to access a firearm so easily is indicative of how prevalent guns are in some parts of Texas and the U.S. overall. Mental health advocates stress that the presence of a gun can make an impulsive moment of despair into a fatal one, whereas a delay in finding a method could provide a window for intervention. This, too, became part of the discussion, although overshadowed by the heartbreak of a young life lost. Yet it's a reminder of how many factors can converge in a single tragic moment. Sawyer Sweeten's story is also a reminder that the sitcom era of the late 90s and early 2000s shaped a generation's sense of family comedy, forging a bond between viewers and actors that felt deeply personal. Sawyer is far from the only child star who died tragically young, but each story has its own nuances, and each loss underscores the vulnerabilities in a system that thrusts children into adult worlds. The difference is that many child star tragedies get overshadowed by sensational details: addiction, run-ins with the law, very public meltdowns. Sawyer's story lacks those dramatic bullet points, which, in a way, makes it even more heartbreaking. It was quiet and private, just as mental health crises often are. If there's a lesson here, it's that quiet can be deceptive. The absence of an outward cry for help doesn't mean everything is okay. More than a decade later, Fans still sometimes discover the news belatedly and experience a wave of shock. They'll say, "I had no idea he passed away," or "he was so young," or "I watched him grow up on TV." That delayed heartbreak echoes across social media whenever an Everybody Loves Raymond binge session spurs a curious viewer to Google the cast. It's not unusual to see posts where people express disbelief, asking how such a smiling child could have ended his life. These expressions mirror a wider conversation about mental health, about how quickly life can tilt from a comedic childhood to a devastating end if support systems fail. The heartbreak of losing Sawyer Sweeten also inspired new dialogues about whether the industry could implement a more standardized system to look after child actors in the aftermath of major roles. Some people have proposed mandatory counseling or ongoing mental health check-ins for at least a couple of years post-project. Others suggest setting up a union-sponsored transitional program that helps child actors navigate teenage life outside of Hollywood. While these ideas have circulated in certain groups, the entertainment industry's support structures for minors remain inconsistent at best. When we talk about a legacy for someone who is only 19 years old, it can sound almost contradictory. How can someone who is just beginning adulthood leave a legacy? But in a symbolic sense, Sawyer's life and death have become part of a larger cautionary tale, one that says, don't overlook the quiet ones. Don't assume a young person is okay just because they aren't causing trouble. If they seem withdrawn, ask why. If they seem listless, find out if their dreams have vanished. If they're feeling unmoored, help them find a new anchor. His legacy is a reminder of how critical it is to pay attention, even when things look calm on the surface. Everybody Loves Raymond hasn't faded away. It runs in syndication across many channels, and it's easily accessible through streaming platforms. Generations born after the show's finale are still discovering its comedic gems. They'll laugh at the comedic timing of Ray Romano, the sharp wit of Patricia Heaton, the quirky presence of Peter Boyle, the scolding of Doris Roberts, and the adorable moments involving Sawyer, Sullivan, and Madylin. In that sense, the childlike image of Sawyer Storm Sweeten continues to live on, eternally captured in the glow of a mid-90s living room set. That contrast between the lively child on screen and the painful truth of his too-soon death may well be the most haunting aspect for viewers who stumble onto his story. From a broader historical standpoint, Sawyer's story also represents a snapshot of a transition in entertainment culture. The late 90s and early 2000s were years before the YouTube and social media era. Child actors got their exposure mostly on television shows and in movies. Today we see child influencers on TikTok or YouTube, and we're still grappling with how to protect them and provide for their well-being as they grow up in a new digitally focused spotlight. The universal lesson stands: if we are going to feature children prominently in entertainment, we must acknowledge the inherent challenges of growing up publicly and create robust structures to help them flourish mentally and emotionally once the spotlight shifts. In losing Sawyer, the Sweeten family was confronted with the darkest side of that challenge. For them, the cinematic illusions gave way to a profound personal tragedy, but they've tried to use their loss to light a path for others. In the months and years following Sawyer's death, the family has supported mental health charities and repeatedly urged people to remove the stigma around seeking help. Their approach has been heartfelt. There's no denial of the pain they've endured, no attempt to mask how devastating the experience has been. They simply carry the memory of Sawyer forward, hoping to prevent another family from living the same nightmare. And so, we reach the delicate question: what can we learn? It's always a bittersweet process to extract lessons from a life that ended too soon. But the takeaway might be that we should listen more carefully to the quiet ones in our lives, especially young people who may have lost their sense of direction. Fame or no fame, every human being harbors dreams, fears, and insecurities. Sometimes the folks who seem most inconspicuous are battling the heaviest burdens. Sawyer's tale underscores the importance of open dialogue and genuine empathetic interest in the inner world of those around us. We can also see a reflection of how ephemeral childhood can be, especially under the bright lights of show business. One moment, a child star is reciting lines, taking direction, enjoying the perks of being on a famous sitcom. The next moment, the show ends. The cameras stop rolling, and that same child is left to figure out who they are without an audience's laughter or applause. If their self-worth is tied to that role, losing it can become a monumental blow. This is a cautionary note for parents, managers, and industry leaders. Children in entertainment are still children first. They need an environment that fosters their sense of self beyond the roles they play. The heartbreak is that Sawyer Sweeten never had the chance to see life beyond those tumultuous teenage years. There's no telling what he might have done had he found the right support or discovered a new passion that replaced the daily routine of being on set. Sometimes young adulthood can be rough, but it also offers new vistas. College, travel, new friendships, hobbies that feed the soul. The tragedy is that depression left unaddressed can overshadow that horizon so completely that the person no longer sees any future at all. As we conclude, perhaps there's a small solace in the knowledge that in those earliest years, those captured on television, Sawyer did bring genuine smiles to countless households. People felt real affection for the little boy who toddled around the set, delivering lines in that sweet, youthful voice. Those memories remain alive in the collective cultural consciousness. If we can unite that memory with a mindful compassion for the struggles that often remain invisible, then perhaps the story will not be in vain. We can remember the gentle child whose comedic timing made us laugh, and we compare that memory with a heightened empathy for anyone, famous or not, who might be quietly hurting. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.